So Damien Chazelle's Babylon has been my most anticipated movie for what feels like forever now. When it was announced a few years ago, I was excited. It was my most anticipated film of 2022 at the beginning of the year, and that never changed, even when the first, very mixed reviews came out, so it kind of goes without saying that I was there on opening night to see this film. I think Damien Chazelle might be my favorite filmmaker. He has made some movies that I genuinely consider to be some of the best ever, and maybe Babylon isn't quite that good, but I still think it's pretty glorious. Let's be honest, you've seen the trailer, you know how insane this movie is. The first half hour especially is a wild, crazy, and insane party scene that completely sets the tone for the film. If you didn't like those first 30 minutes, you probably won't like the rest of the film. I, however, absolutely adored those first 30 minutes. I think it's probably the best part of the whole movie, in fact. I'd actually say that the whole first hour is the best part of the film. It is genuinely phenomenal. If the whole film was as good as that first hour, I think it might just be my favorite movie of the year. Everything is so fast and crazy and fun and magical and insane, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. The movie slows down a bit after that, but definitely doesn't get that much worse. It drags for a tiny bit in the middle, but to be honest, that was bound to happen considering this movie is 3 hours long and packed full of different storylines and plot points. I actually think it's pretty impressive how little it dragged despite its runtime. This was probably the quickest 3-hour movie I've ever seen, by which I mean that it didn't feel like 3 hours in the slightest. This movie was one of the longest I've seen all year, and I honestly wouldn't have minded watching like an hour or two more of it. I also think the conclusion is pretty great, not necessarily talking about the actual ending, which I'll get to in a bit, but I think the movie concludes in a pretty great way. I really liked how some of the individual storylines ended, and I think Chazelle once again constructs a very solid wrap-up to his film. The ending itself is, and I cannot explain this enough, ridiculous. Just like the movie itself, people seem to be very mixed on it. I've seen a ton of people who think the ending is the dumbest, most stupid thing they've ever seen, but I am not among that crowd. I obviously won't spoil the ending because, to be honest, you kind of have to see it to believe it, but I really liked it. I completely understand if you don't like this ending. I don't even know how or why Chazelle got the idea to do this, but me personally, I loved it. Now technically, this movie is just about as good as the rest of Chazelle's films, which means it's pretty incredible. Linus Sandgren, who previously did the cinematography with Chazelle for both La La Land and First Man, two absolutely gorgeous films, is back for this movie, and he did an absolutely great job. I'm not really sure how great it'll look compared to the other two films he did with Chazelle, but just talking about it on its own, I think it's pretty fantastic. I will say it has a bit of a drier color palette compared to those two films I just mentioned, but I don't really think it needed an over-the-top beautiful array of colors in the same way I feel something like La La Land definitely did. The cinematography itself is just great, it has personality, it looks beautiful, it does everything it has to completely enthrall you in this world. There are a couple beautiful shots where the camera just kind of holds in one place, but the best shots in the movie are absolutely at the first party scene where we see the camera just kind of weave throughout the building, moving from person to person, showing everything that's going on and summing up the absolutely insanity of it all. I've always loved the editing in Chazelle's films. I think he did some really interesting stuff with it. Tom Cross, who edited both La La Land and Whiplash for Chazelle, two of, in my opinion, the best edited films ever, also returns for this film, and he did a pretty great job here as well. I do think there were a couple weird cuts and edits here and there, however, that was probably bound to happen considering the amount of editing that went into this movie. A couple other technical things I wanted to touch on because I thought they were great: the set design, the costumes, and the sound. I'll start with the set design, which is kind of mind-blowing. I mean, they were able to recreate old Hollywood and the parties of its time so impeccably. They made the world feel completely real and lived in, and as magical and horrible as it was supposed to. The costumes are absolutely fabulous as well. Some are intricate and just kind of awesome, especially some of the ones that Margot Robbie and Jean Smart's character wore, as well as a few other characters, and even just some of the background characters who also had some really cool costumes. The sound, as I said, was also pretty great. This is a pretty loud film, just like most of Chazelle's movies are, so the sound kind of has to be good, but it definitely is. I've somehow managed to avoid talking about it up to this point, but the musical score in this film is, and I want to say this as sincerely as possible, truly one of the greatest I've heard in a while, and maybe, and I know this is kind of a crazy statement, one of the greatest I have ever heard. Every single track is so fantastic, so memorable. I can't lie, I had listened to the score before seeing the movie because I just couldn't stop myself, but hearing every track for the first time on the big screen after having listened to them before was just such a great feeling. I feel that every track is absolutely impeccable and that Justin Hurwitz did another fantastic job, but the best tracks were definitely the ones early in the movie, especially at that first big party. Every track was energetic and exciting and helped set the tone and feeling of the movie in a fantastic way. The musical motifs that Hurwitz uses throughout the story, similarly to what he did in something like La La Land, is very effective. I just honestly can't rave about the score enough. If it somehow manages to not win Best Original Score at the Oscars this year, I will actually be furious. This movie has some of the best performances of the year for sure. I was kind of expecting everybody to be great going in, but some people even outperformed my prior expectations. Brad Pitt was one of those people. I know he's a great actor, but for whatever reason, I just wasn't sure how great he'd be in this movie. After watching the movie, I can confirm that he is actually pretty great. I found myself caring about his character and feeling way more emotionally invested in him than I thought, and I mean way more. I really like what they did with his character and the arc that he goes throughout the film, and Pitt absolutely does a really good job. Someone who didn't surprise me at all with how great she was, Margot Robbie. The first hour, maybe hour and a half or so, is all Margot Robbie's movie. She is crazy, fun, comedic, just a true pleasure to watch on screen. She demands screen time, she demands to be the centerpiece of every shot, and it's kind of hard to look away from. I think in the second half of the film, where I wouldn't necessarily say she becomes less vital to the story, but has a bit less screen time and is a bit more reserved compared to how wild she was at the start of the movie, she's also pretty solid. Her performance becomes a lot more subtle, and I'm sure I'd like it even more on a rewatch. But my personal favorite performance of the film, and one of my favorite performances of the year, Diego Calva. I, along with pretty much everybody else who's seen this movie, haven't seen Calva in everything, but from now on, I need him to be in everything. He is so fantastic in this movie. Margot Robbie may be the heartbeat of the film, but Diego Calva is the one who drives the story forward. I think Calva is the one who audiences will connect with the most just because of the way his story and arc is told. You may not agree with every one of his actions, but you understand them. He does everything he has to in this movie. He is fun, just like Margot Robbie or Brad Pitt's character when he has to be, but when he has to be serious or sincere or calm or upset, he's absolutely fantastic. Again, I really hope Calva gets some more major roles soon, because I don't think he's even going to get as much credit as Margot Robbie or Brad Pitt get from this film, when I believe he deserves even more. You know, my biggest problem with First Man, Chazelle's most recent movie before this, was that it didn't feel like a Chazelle movie. It just felt like a movie anybody could have made. But Babylon, while being completely different from Chazelle's best work, feels exactly like a Chazelle film. There's a few reasons why. The jazz themes and musical motifs, the location being not just a setting but an actual character in the movie, and even just the direction in general, which is so fantastic. Chazelle directs this movie to an absolutely insane level. I mean, you know how much is going on in this movie, especially in that first hour, but Chazelle is able to make everything coherent and consistent, which is pretty impressive. A lot of people, even Damien Chazelle himself, has talked about this movie not only being a love letter to cinema, but a hate letter to Hollywood, and I think that is the perfect way to sum it up. The movie uses the transition of silent movies to talkies to describe how terrible a place Hollywood can be, how it can lift you up and raise you to the stars, how it can make you a star, but how it can spit you out like it's nothing at all, how it can forget about you with a snap of a finger. But Chazelle didn't just make a movie about how terrible Hollywood is. He made a movie about how terrible Hollywood is, but how great what they make is. How magical, how creative, how wonderful, how important movies can be to any given person. How an actor can live forever because of one performance. How somebody can fall in love with a movie when it comes out, and that a completely different person in a completely different place can see it 100 years later and fall in love with it just as much. A movie can be immortal. Film, like Diego Calva's character said in the trailer, is bigger than life. The desire to be bigger than life is what causes everybody in this movie to do what they do, and at one point, they all are bigger than life. They are at the top of the world, they are stars, but then all of a sudden, it all disappears. In the blink of an eye, it's all gone. Thinking back on the movie, I've realized it's a lot darker than I thought when I had first seen it. Knowing how the characters start the story and how they eventually end it. How these characters did so much just to be stars, even if it meant they'd one day be forgotten. But the thing is, they aren't forgotten. As they move on, as Hollywood moves on, movies do not. They may change, they may evolve, but they never fully move on. Movies can mean so much to so many. They can make you laugh, cry, clap, they can make you happy, sad, angry, and this movie did all of that for me. More than everything I've talked about in this video, that's why I love this movie so much. Because it proved to me just how incredible movies are and helped me remember why I fell in love with them in the first place. You know, I never really had any doubt that Chazelle wouldn't be able to make this movie work. Even when those first very mixed reviews came out, I still knew I'd love this film, even if it wasn't for everyone. Chazelle just makes movies that I love and resonate with to the highest level, and somehow he never seems to fail. I still don't think he's made a bad film, and I'm not sure he could if he tried. To everyone that hates this movie, listen, I completely understand. Some of Chazelle's other films like La La Land also get hate, and I think that's completely undeserved, but for this movie, I get it. It's not for everyone, but it was for me. I really, really loved it. Damien Chazelle, please never stop making movies.